Thanks for joining us for Hope Springs Eternal. We're taking a little different turn this week as we've come out of our Summer of Song here at First United Methodist Church, and we're going to be turning into expectations of the people of God that were present in what we call the Old Testament, the season of the faith where people were in expectancy of one that God would send, that we proclaim as a Messiah who has come. But for centuries before the arrival of Jesus, there were expectations of God and how God would act in a way that would be gratifying and transformative to people and to our world. And those took shape in different ways. And so today we're going to have some conversation about that in general and talk about one of those perspectives that I think are found in the book of Isaiah. My friend Ricky Ricks and I are going to be conversing about this. Ricky said, wow, we're going to do this on pretty short notice today, but I think we'll have a great conversation. And if we prepared, we would be more confusing,
We
I'm
would
sure.
be more confusing.
So, Ricky,
I don't know if we should say don't expect much or what. I don't know.
I don't know. I have great expectations
Okay,
for this.
let's go then.
And,
Let's go.
and this is a season of expectation, isn't it,
Absolutely.
Ricky? I
Sure.
mean, here we are. I know for some of you, you're thinking summertime, August, but school starts here next week in our area, and it's starting earlier all the time in many other areas. So as back to school season comes, there is a whole social aspect of expectation. Kids going back to school, people getting ready for transitions to college, lots of things that are taking place here in this season ahead. And I think that relates very much to the long and hard, sometimes struggled expectations of a people who were expecting God to do something powerful and prolific. And when God did, many were looking for some other type of answer, a different type of response from God than what they got in Jesus Christ. So I think it'll play out. We'll see how you feel about it after our podcast today, where minus Katie, who's out of town this week, but we're glad that Ricky and I can just, brush the problem of the young child among us away so that we could have a conversation about expectations. So,
Oh, well, I just think about expectations, and you're right. I mean, it's a great time. My grandson is excited about going back to school, and it's doing all those things about getting ready and supplies and clothes and all of that. And both of my children are teachers. They're getting ready. A sense of excitement. One's at a new school, one's returning, and but both of them have that sense, and I guess we all do. I mean, we all live with a sense of expectation as we think about our futures, we think about our world, and it is good for us, I think, to think about how they thought about God in the midst of all of this.
Yeah. I'm a big baseball fan, and they always say there's no day of greater expectation than opening day of the season, where everybody starts at ground zero, and everyone believes there's a chance for their team. Now, here we are in the dog days of summer in August, and baseball teams are kind of, all right, they've kind of shown different levels of competency to this point. Some have already been pretty much eliminated. They're selling players to other teams who are in contention. That's a big thing. They just had the trade deadline recently. But now expectations have changed for many. If you're a Pittsburgh Pirates fan, as I am, expectations are kind of low, and you're hoping for next year or maybe the year after that. Whereas if you're a Detroit Tigers fan or a Houston Astros fan, a Milwaukee Brewers or Chicago Cubs fan, there's some excitement that's in the air for those people, but not so much for the others who are selling off players and thinking about next year already. So it is with school year. It won't be a week into it, and some people will find that their great expectations have already been dashed by
Absolutely.
not meshing with a teacher, not being in the classroom with the people they thought they were going to be. Somebody turned down for the homecoming dance when invited. Another one not making the first string on a ball team or being the head cheerleader. These things are serious, even if they really are rather transient in the bigger picture of things, aren't they?
Yeah. So why do you think that we buy into expectations when we know, you talked about as being old, we know that things don't always go right. They don't, they fall apart, but yet all of us still live with expectation, I think.
And let's even put it in a even deeper theological aspect. Hope. We are programmed to be people of hope. To faith, hope, and love. These three abide, but the greatest of these is love. We think a lot of hope, the expectation of good from a good and benevolent God, the optimistic desire for something better than what we experience. I think it's a part of the human nature to do that way. In fact, I'd rather be hopeful with great expectations than to be cynical or jaded or pessimistic to a fault. But sometimes those expectations, when they're unrealistic or when they are short-sighted, when they're judged in the minutia of the immediacy of what's happening now, I think can be very diminishing and demoralizing for us, Ricky. But I live to expect for something better. I work to help make something better. But I do know that it's a double-edged sword, this aspect of expectations. What about for you?
I think that's right. I think about there have been times when I had expectations about how ministry was going to play out. And I got so caught up in the parameters of that expectation that I missed out on the wonders of things that were going on all around me. And I think that's true of how, just to take from the Old Testament, how that there were people whose expectation of what the Messiah would look like and their parameters, their pictures of it was so ingrained that they missed out on what God was doing or going to do. What do you think?
Yeah, I absolutely believe that. I also believe that happens in all kinds of ways in our life.
I did.
That sometimes the thing that is best in our life is taken for granted at the time because we were expecting something else, working towards something else, hoping for something else, and miss the whole gift of what was being offered, what was before us, what was availed. I think that is definitely a very much a part of the human condition.
Yeah.
I also believe that we're very short-sighted and we judge based on the pragmatic. Many of the passages in the Bible that we talk about having messianic expectations of pointing to one to come had just as much of an expectation of an immediate resolution of a real and tangible problem in the present, that as the prophets were writing about it, as people were hearkening to God, they weren't worried about what was going to happen 400 years later, 1,000 years later. They were saying, help me now, help me today. And sometimes the help of today is a hindrance for tomorrow. And sometimes the best thing for tomorrow may be the thing we least desire today. And I think that there's some wisdom in that.
Yeah.
In this crazy movie that I like, Charlie Wilson's War, there is this great, if you will, fable that Philip Seymour Hoffman's character, who is an FBI agent, uses as, he says, the Zen master once said, and it's about these high and low experiences that the person says, then that must be good. And he said, we shall see, well, that must be bad. Well, we shall see. What we think is a good thing in the immediacy of it can turn out to not be a good thing. What we think is a great defeat may be the preparation for the greatest of gifts to come. I think that there's a little bit of that element in the way in which we look at our faith and look at the pragmatics of what's happening right now in the instantaneous moments of our lives, and not stepping back and seeing the bigger picture of it.
Yeah, I think so. I mean, I think about like in the Bible when Jacob and Esau wrestle, and then Jacob looks back on it and he says, God was in this place and I didn't know it. I just think that's true of my life and my faith journey, that I had a picture in my mind of how things should go. And I missed out on, or I just was surprised that God acted in a way. Maybe there were glimpses of truth, in it. Like in the Bible when it talks about God as king, that there is that element of truth. But my picture of king can so skew what God is doing or something like that.
Let's take a few examples here.
Okay.
Think about a teenage boy or a teenage girl. When they had posters on their walls of rock stars, of movie stars, of great athletes, and so forth. When your wife and my wife were envisioning the person that they would be with as a 13, 14, or 15-year-old, did they have pictures of you and me on their walls,
Probably not.
And did we have pictures of them on our walls? And yet, even though the person that God placed into our lives and the fact that we were placed into somebody else's life may be exactly the person that God intended, may be exactly the person that we need, but was not the one that we envisioned as a child or as a youth or as a young adult. Oftentimes we find that the things that were so important to us of a certain era were not the things that were important. And we might have found the right person for all the wrong reasons for what we were looking for and what was important to us. And as I look back on my life, whether it be my personal life, my work life, my interests and the like, many things that I lived for at a time are not the things that matter at all to me now.
Yeah.
And so expectations are a beautiful, wonderful thing. They give us hope. They give us meaning. They give us impetus, fuel for the journey. But sometimes we have to modify them and see them in a longer view and with a different set of eyes than maybe we were first seeing that. So I think that was the case in the faith community. I think that the very earliest understandings of our faith in Eden was we want a restoration of Eden, but what that Eden looks like for you versus what it looks like for me, what somebody else wants Eden to be, they always seem to make it fit with what their own personal desires are, right?
Oh, I think so.
Haven't you had that person that said, I hope heaven is like a lake where fish are jumping and the sky is blue, or for another one, I hope it's waves upon the ocean crashing on a beach, or for another person, I hope it's a beautiful, well-manicured golf course with nobody in the way, on that way. We have these kinds of selfish expectations that, quite frankly, if my best vision of one of those journeys were one that I had, I think I would find very quickly that I would grow tired of those things, even if I had received them as the culmination of my expectations, you know. And
Yeah, I think so. I mean, I think that, first of all, Tricia, it's your picture that was up on my wall. I just know
yes,
it.
Leanne, you were on mine too.
Yeah,
Yes.
so, but after that, I do think that that when we talk about something being messianic, it is something that ought to be true for all peoples.
Yes.
And so I mean, you can think about
World changing,
world
not
changing.
just
Yeah, not
just me centered, but we centered, you know, kind of thing.
I mean, I think there are some things, that are eternal, that all of us have a need for survival. All of us have a desire to be happy, for our lives to have significance. And I'd say for us to connect with something eternal, something
Yes.
bigger than ourselves. And yet our expressions of that sometimes get in our way. Don't you think?
Yeah. And I know we seem like we're going far flung, but I think this is absolutely at the core of what we were trying to get into in these next 4 weeks ahead about the transient nature of some expectations
Yeah, man.
and the misguided sense of some expectations that we have. I'm going to throw this in a completely different direction, but it just hit me as we were talking. Last night I was watching 60 Minutes and it had a segment on AI. And AI is one of those things where you find three camps. There's a camp that just doesn't understand it, doesn't care about it, just leave me alone. I don't want to know anything about it. I just leave it alone.
Yeah.
Then there are people who are thinking apocalyptically. They're remembering those movies of machines that take over the world and start annihilating humanity, and they start thinking about the dangers of AI and this idea that we're creating something that will be the doom of all humankind. And then there are people like this person that was talking that had such high hopes and expectations for AI while still being warning about some of its dangers and some of the guardrails, as he liked to put it, that need to be put up, who said he believes that all disease could essentially be eradicated in the next 10 years if the progressions of AI go on the track that they're presently on, that the understanding of disease, of life, of health could be solved by AI in the next decade, that we could be free of cancer, free of heart disease, free of all the major life-threatening diseases of our time, just by the capability of AI over the next decade. Now, that seems to be a rather high expectation, a rather optimistic view. And what we will probably find is that maybe some of those things might be realized, but that it might actually lead to something completely different, and it might be a completely different pathway that actually leads to the eradication of a disease or the like. But we come in with expectations. We believe that whatever movement is going to be one that progresses for infinitum. And we all know that history has proven very seldom is that the case. And that oftentimes we have to have measured expectations for the pragmatic with a hope for something that goes beyond what we experience that comes from God and the holy other, rather than from ourselves or from what we can do for ourselves. And yet we're to be participants in that, And I think when we talk about expectations, it does have that double-edged sword of the highest hopes and the greatest fears. And we should not be dictated by our fears or get out of whack with our hopes and find a faithful pathway that leads us in a place that brings us into commonality with God, rather than making God shaped into what we want God to be, what we want reality to be. And I think some of these expectations that were formed centuries before Jesus ever came onto the scene in the physical incarnation of God on earth in Jesus. I think were expectations that were built out of the hopes and dreams and thoughts, and that they took shape in very pragmatic ways that were not in alignment with really what God was trying to say into that. We put our own spin on it, I guess I would say. Whether that was a restoration of the Davidic kingdom, whether that was a utopic restoration of Eden, whether that was a victory over evil, a higher moral standard and transformation of life itself, whether that was a peaceable kingdom where all threats were now operating in harmony, or just of the kind of leader that would make everything better. Whatever kinds of ways in which that got shaped, very few of them looked like a carpenter's son who married an ordinary young woman, who had a baby, who now came out of this out of the way place, and yet we say is the Son of God and the transforming action when he lived a short life, died a cruel death, and the world seems to still have a lot of brokenness in it, even 2,000 years after Jesus' emergence. So I guess we need to try to maybe look at the bigger picture and the longer haul in our expectations, even as we are a people of faith 2,000 years in the aftermath of this Messiah who we believe has come in Jesus Christ, and maybe look at some of these expectations with an understanding that maybe some of our expectations are out of whack. And
a good way, I was just sitting here thinking about when I first started in ministry. I don't know why. I went to the Bible bookstore and I bought a canvas print. And it was a canvas print of a lion and a lamb and wolf all laying down together. And I hung it up in my, my house, because that was the church office.
Yes.
And I remember one of the kids coming over and looking at that, and then looking back at me and said, "Why do you have that hanging up?" And I said, "Well, it's this passage out of Isaiah, and I really like it a lot." And they looked back at me and they went, "That'll never happen. That'll never happen." And I went, "Well, we believe in Jesus Christ and like that." And he goes, "Yeah, but just think about the world. That'll never happen." And I thought, it really goes to, this kind of discussion about how we view the work of God.
yes,
And how they saw that, like you said, this utopia, this peaceable kingdom.
yes,
And yet we continue to tell those stories in a world where kids in Gaza are starving to death, and
where there's war in
where
so many
war
places.
so many places, and everything.
And where there's hatred in communities, not just among nations. The warring factors are not just on macro scales, they're on micro scales.
Absolutely.
I'm at war with myself at times of what I desire in the moment versus what I know is good. I find that when I see a piece of pie that I've already had one piece, do I really need a second one to bring more joy to me? Or does that bring actually an overabundance of what I think will give me joy that only puts extra pounds on me and causes heart disease? I think that sometimes we've got to have a bigger picture to look to, a greater understanding, and understand that the battlegrounds that we really need to be fighting on may be very close to home. They're in our own hearts and in our own lives, and in the matters that are within our reach. God moves in very powerful ways in the minutia, as well as very dramatic ways in the greater picture that we still don't understand, even after all these years of our faith. When Jesus showed up on the scene, there were many scoffers from the faith community, people who were challenged by his teachings, who were saying, you know what? This really messes up what benefits me in this structure that I am a part of, you know? Where people were hoping for transformation, the people empowered were threatened by it. For the people who felt a life that was conflictive with what Jesus was teaching, he was very threatening to them on a personal basis. And I think in those expectations of victory over our enemies, what happens when we are the enemy of somebody's circumstance? What happens when we are on the other side of that? Doesn't God care about those who are on the opposite side of us politically? We're born in a different country, of a different economic circumstance. Aren't we all valued by God? And how do we understand who we are called to be, not just for our own or for our close-knit communities, but for the whole of God's creation? I think these are the kinds of things that we need to be talking about more and reflecting on. And I find still there's tremendous numbers of books, tremendous numbers of explorations that are looking at the pragmatic as well as the bigger picture. And we need a little bit of both into that.
Sure.
We're going to start off with some of those utopic expectations that came out of Isaiah. Our first week is going to be, my sermon's going to be on high expectations. We're getting back to school, and there's a lot of high expectations for the year ahead. Parents who are looking for peaceful homes with their kids going off to school, kids who are looking forward to meeting new friends, learning new things, winning victory over the world, changing their lives and the lives of others. We have expectations here at the church that we certainly have, but I hope that as we make those expectations, we also pause to reflect and see a bigger picture that maybe is in conflict with some of those expectations, and allow ourselves to be used by God, even if God's expectations are quite different from our own, to be able to live into what God is doing and the like. Some of those hopes of that lion laying down with the lamb, I don't see that very often, but I do see pictures of kitties getting along with dogs sometimes. I see people on different circumstances economically, people of power and of weakness, who seem to find commonality for one another. I see in my own life renewed senses of hope in relationships with my children, in the desires I have for my grandchildren, in the ways I want to improve my relationship with my spouse, my friends. And I'm finding that instead of praying for them to change, I need to be thinking about how God calls me to be a different person to affect change in my life and in the world ahead. Don't you find that?
I think so. I think the older I've gotten, the more it's not so much about my expectations, but it is about being open to how God is working on me, because I just spent way too much of my time about how God ought to work on them or change this or change that. Yeah. When the reality is, for me, Jay, that it's my expectation now is that God will do a new work in my life, and that I will be open to that. And if I am not, that God will correct me and show me what that looks like. Because,
while not being deterred at pitfalls and bumps in the road, twists there, but that we have some resiliency, but also some awareness
Sure.
to direct us in a pathway that's in with God. And there's a lot of people not even talking to God or listening to God who have high expectations of God, but don't have a clue what God might be saying, doing, thinking. I mean, I think when we read the scriptures, when we pray, we need to be able to pause and recognize our place in this instead of being the people who are demanding of God for what it is that we know God ought to be doing from our perspective. I know I have my own ideas that I think are great ideas.
Oh, I think mine are wonderful
until they
too.
prove out to be very foolish at times, while also knowing the things that we learn and grow from to hopefully cast a better pathway to direct a more faithful journey in our faith. I'm encouraged by these words, but I also try to make sure that I'm not getting so expectant and so quick in my desire to see them fulfilled that I don't play the proper role that God calls of me in what God is doing,
Yeah, I told you that I was rereading Bonhoeffer's book on the cost of discipleship, and one of the things that he says in there is when Jesus called the disciples, he didn't tell them what the plan was.
Yeah.
All he did is said, "Hey, follow me."
Yeah. And what they were expecting of Jesus, the people closest to him, they were expecting an earthly kingdom. They were arguing about who would sit on his right-hand side. They were looking for someone who was going to overthrow power and take control, not for someone who was going to die on a cross. Even after he told them multiple times they didn't believe him. How could that be? So I do think that we need to stay close to what we understand as the Word of God and look closely at the movement of how God has worked through and in spite of humankind in this journey, and see things from the long view. Here we are in Longview, Texas, to see the long view while understanding our role in the present as a part of that longer view. And I think that's one of the great things about expectations is it does give us a place to point to that we hope God is leading us toward that will be of assistance as we were intended to be of assistance in the work of God in the world. And I'm hoping that we can do that in a way that will prepare us for the next phase of whatever God is calling us to be individually and as a body of people together. But Ricky, don't you think it's kind of scary? We talk about a desire for peace in our world, and yet even Christians can't seem to agree on much of anything these days. There are fights that happen within denominations. We've had our share in the United Methodist Church and in the Methodist faith tradition. There are congregations who are embattled by different groups within them that want to take the church in a certain direction that are not of commonality of vision. It happens in households. It happens in individual lives. How do we allow expectations and a common view of what God is calling us to do to bring us together rather than to tear us apart? How do we affect that? I think it begins with me, but and I hope for you with you, but it also means learning to listen to God more and to listen to others so that we're not imposing our words and our thoughts and desires on God.
I think so, Jay. I think that, again, this is simplistic, but I think our unity is in Christ Jesus and not in like you and me. The thing that makes things work is Jesus Christ.
Yeah.
And
sometimes my own control or desire for control gets in the way of God.
And I'm going to delineate that between my picture of Christ and who Christ really is, and how the Holy Spirit is at work. Because, both of us, we'll talk about that freely, that we all have a picture of how things should be. When that gets in the way and we miss out on what God is doing, that's where we get ourselves in trouble. I think expectations are wonderful, but when our expectations take hold rather than what God is actually doing, that's where I get, at least that's where I get myself in trouble.
Yeah, I think that's that's a great point.
When I have a picture of how the church ought to go, rather than waiting and seeing what God is doing, that's when I mess up, and I think that's how we get divided, because it is. Was it? Okay, I've forgotten who wrote the book, A Long Obedience in the Same Direction. I just think that that's what faith is about, and that I do have to learn to lay down my expectations, or let them. I don't want to say that. Let them be a kind of a guide, a framework of exploration, but at the same time, know that God may be doing a totally opposite thing.
Yeah, I know when we talked about where we heading this year, and where have we come from, where are we at, and where are we going. I know that we really wanted last year to double down on who it is that we are within the landscape of Christianity. Who are we as United Methodist Christians? How do we understand the faith expression and our part in it? Okay, and this year, as I really was reflecting as we were talking, it just became evident that we needed to really start talking about who and what it was that Jesus taught, and who he was, and who he is, and how too often there's this sort of populist view of Jesus that is sort of like the nice guy who gives you everything you ever want, and really start to get into, no, let's look deeper into who Jesus said he was, as understood through different lenses, and start to understand what that says to us as followers of Jesus Christ. Are we following Jesus, or are we following the person we want Jesus to be for our selfish desires? I think that that's a great thing. And as we do that, we've got to start with our expectations and how sometimes they can get in the way rather than help us in this. As we found in a circumstance of centuries of expectation that we say were fulfilled in Jesus, and yet were also the basis of a lot of the demise of Jesus in the flesh. In people who said, that's not the Messiah I was expecting. That's not who I wanted God to send. That's not what I wanted to happen there. I think that looking at that will be of profit to us as we go deeper into Jesus.
I think so.
I'm looking forward to it. I have great expectations for not only the 4 weeks ahead, but for the year ahead. And I love the title of our podcast. And some people said, I didn't hear much hope today, or what was hopeful in that? I think when we look deeper to what God is doing and who we are and where that intersects, there's the basis of hope.
I do too.
And I think hope springs eternal when we draw closer to God, when we are drawing closer to who God created us to be. And I have great expectations of where we're going to be going and how it's going to lead us closer. And I hope those listening, it helps them somehow in their journey in Christ.
Me too.
I'm glad that I make that journey with you, Ricky. And
me with you, Jeff.
We'll be glad to have Katie back and all of the insight that people are missing from today's podcast. I hope that you enjoyed our time together, and I hope that you will, with expectation, look at what's ahead and join us for this journey. Until then, may hope spring eternal.
Bye-bye.